My name is Kalpesh, and I'm one of the Sloan grad. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our panel moderator, Professor Stuart Madnick, who is also director of IC-Cube initiative that is out of MIT. Please welcome Professor Stuart Madnick.
Thank you. So I just want to set a few opening remarks to kind of set the stage for our session today, because I really want to hear the comments, feedback, and discussion from our panel. We came up with the title today of Mitigating Cyber Risks in the Growing World of Internet-Connected Devices. And of course, all of you have heard about attacks on Target and Sony and such, but I thought I'd kind of tell you about a couple things that may not have gotten as much attention to you. Show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the SWIFT network? Okay. As you know, SWIFT is a money transfer network. I was told on a typical day they send around $9 trillion. I met with them about a year ago, and I said, anybody who has $9 trillion, if you haven't been attacked yet, it's just a matter of time. You remember the old bank robber who said, why do you rob banks? Answer, that's where the money was. So, of course, they, not them, but through their network, $81 million was stolen. And it was almost $1 billion other than a typographical error. If the criminals had invested in a spell checker, they might have got another $800 million. I won't ask how many of you were discovered or disclosed on the Panama Papers, but I assume you've all heard about that. Now, here's a question for you, show of hands. How many of you know of a company that was attacked by ransomware? Anybody? So it seems like a fair number of you. And it is a fascinating topic. I won't go through it right now, but the amount has gone from being about $27 million 2 years ago to over $300 million reported supposedly last year. And then, of course, many of you may have heard about this. Getting more to the tone of this session today is kind of new kinds of attacks. You probably have heard about the hackers taking control of a Jeep Cherokee not too long ago. And, of course, according to one report, security issues regarding the Internet of Things, the IoT, is expected to rise up to $2 trillion. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but that's when you get to trillions, that's serious money, I think, in most cases. So I'll give you one last fun fact. If you will, this is 2014. It goes back a little ways. A cyber attack that attacked household appliances and made them basically into a botnet, robots, if you will, that then sent out spam mail. In this case, one of our speakers is Samsung. This is not a Samsung refrigerator, just so you could, I'll let you table later on. But this refrigerator was sending out, imagine the police coming, breaking down your front door and arresting your refrigerator for sending porno to high school students. Okay. It's just a matter of time before that happens. And of course, the story I end with relates to my brother, Ron. He's one of those people, I don't know if you in your family have one like this, who cannot function in the morning until he's had his cup of coffee. Imagine you get an email that says, we have taken control of your coffee pot. Send us 10 Bitcoins or you will not get your coffee today. You know, that is things you have to look forward to. So, as Kalpesh mentioned at the beginning, we have a new initiative at MIT. I won't say anything about it other than the name, which will take 45 minutes. It is the Interdisciplinary Consortium for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. That's a mouthful, but the initials are IC, or we summarize it by calling it IC cubed. We could use cubes at here. At Harvard, probably only go to squares. So, so I'll be glad to, after the session is over, I'll be glad to talk to you more about our initiative at MIT, as well as give you a copy of these slides if you're interested. So what I'm going to do is introduce our panel, if you will. The panel, we're going to look at this issue of internet-connected devices and the whole broad issue of cybersecurity. The numbers vary all over the place. People estimate anywhere from 4 to 10 billion of internet-connected devices, your refrigerator, your coffee pot, possibly. And various estimates estimate that within the next 5 years, it'll rise to 30 billion in one study and 200 billion in another study. Either way, that number is huge. No political campaign here. Okay. So that creates all kinds of fantastic new opportunities, new kinds of things these devices can do, but also create a whole range of new kinds of attack surfaces. And therefore, the amount of risks are a big concern. One of the issues we're going to be talking about in this panel today is how does your organization deal with these emerging challenges, the ones that exist today and the ones that will be increasing with us. So we're going to talk a lot about what I call the strategic, managerial, and operational aspects of cybersecurity. Without any further ado, I'm going to be introducing our panel. What I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do is take about just 2 minutes. First, just introduce themselves and what their role is in their organization. And I've asked each one of them to make one thing, what is their major concern? Just to make that statement to kind of set the tone for the rest of the session. So maybe, Roota, want to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Roota Almeida. I'm the head of information security at Delta Dental of New Jersey. And I'm responsible for information security and risk management within that company. Delta Dental has been in the business since early 1960s, promoting dental healthcare. So it is a pretty old company with legacy systems like many companies out there. So one of the things that is on top of my mind, the way I put it is old code, new chaos. So the old code, when it was written, it was not exploited at that time when new, fresh set of eyes look at old codes, or when an old code is actually refined for new generation, for new functionality. Sometimes undocumented gaps are added to it. So when that is looked at by a new, fresh set of eyes, it can be exploited in a manner that you never thought of. So when we looked at like shell shock or heartbleed came out, it doesn't mean that only when it was made public it was exploited. It might have been exploited for years. It's just that it was never made public. So one of those old codes is what my major concern is.
And maybe Tom, do you want to go next?
Yeah, my name's Tom Eilers. I run the public sector for government education for Intel and Intel Security as a security division. And you know, from what we talk to and talk about is about delivering positive outcomes. And it's interesting because the compute technologies today, and we develop solutions for the industry. And when you start talking about the compute technologies today, it cannot advance. We talk about the Internet of Things and the multiplier that we're about to, the wave that's about to hit us. And it's really a matter of building and architecting security into the products. And not just doing that, but having a cooperative approach. The problem is there are so many security technologies on the market, but everyone sees threats and risks through a different lens. And for us, we're promoting an industry standard known as data exchange layer, where we can have communications that we can share and have a common back end that we can share threat intelligence. Because cooperatively, if we're going to wait for the bureaucrats to solve this problem, we're in a lot of trouble. And then really at the end of the day is promoting those industry standards. The other part of that and things that we're focused in on is getting talent. We're at a talent deficit right now. I mean, if I look at what we're looking for in security talent, we're at about a 40 to 50% deficit in available talent to fill the positions that we need in the industry. So we're out talking about that too.
Excellent. Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Morrison. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at State Street Bank. We're slightly older than Delta Dental. We were founded in 1792. So just a little bit. Yeah. We're an investment bank, so we have 30, depends on what day of the week it is, but we have roughly $30 trillion under custody that we manage on a daily basis for our clients. And obviously it's preeminent in one of our larger risks are the fact of a cyber attack that would somehow circumvent or steal money or steal our client information. So we put a lot of emphasis on being able to protect our clients' information as well as our own internal IP and our own internal PII information. So enough about State Street. So what really keeps me up at night, or really what the most, I think it's two things. One is third-party risk access. We have lots and lots of vendors, lots and lots of clients. And what worries me is we do these due diligence reports. There are now some commoditizing. There's some companies out there that'll actually do security scans of these companies to look for vulnerabilities on their internet presence and stuff. And then we fill out questionnaires that the vendors may or may not fill out, and they may or may not fill out accurately. So we're basically doing this on a whole series of trust with our clients and our vendors that they are not going to degrade our security environment. And conversely, then we have to put in enough security features that we can say we don't believe what they're saying or they're not good enough to meet our standards. But we also have to maintain that operational ease of use. So we're constantly balancing operations and security. And we're still viewed as, and I think erroneously, we're still viewed as an obstacle for progress in the cyber world. And part of my biggest challenge at State Street and dealing with internally and with clients is to show how security in a digitized world is an enabler for their business. It's a function that you have to do, and these are the reasons why. And that's actually, it's a much larger challenge than you would think. Because everything that people do with a computer, they expect it to work miraculously. When they hit the button, it always works. Nothing ever happens. Nothing ever breaks. All software is perfect with no bugs. So I think there's sort of a misunderstanding of where cyber fits in and what the limitations that we can and cannot do to support the business operations.
And last but not least, Sam.
I'm Sam Phillips. I'm VP and CISO for Samsung Business. And so what we are is the organization that sells and supports services as well as hardware and other products for Samsung in the US. I think that my job is twofold. I actually have responsibility for the security of the products that we use to deliver services to our customers. And then also we do security assessments for our customers relative to the mobile environment. And then gradually as that grows, then we'll move into things such as IoT. From my perspective, I think we still start off with, and this is probably one of the biggest issues, is first off, we don't know what the business requirement is for a technology that we start implementing. And I'll go back to days at a large financial institution where all of a sudden we had to have BlackBerries, and this was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there was no business case made for them. So all of a sudden we implemented BlackBerries. And we started pushing information out over internet connections and all that in order to make the things work. We really didn't understand what the business need was. We didn't understand what the risk model looked like. And so we were really running blind. And so we were trying very, very hard to make sure that we got caught up on the security requirements that were necessary to protect the information that was transiting the system, and then also those systems that we had to plug into as well. So I think that's probably my biggest issue, at least at this point in time, is that we need to understand why we're doing something. We need to understand the potential threat and then the risk associated with that particular piece of the equation as well, and then build in, as we're building out and architecting the solution, build in the security components in it. Again, if you start from that point, you're not adding things on, it becomes less onerous on the environment once you get going.
Great, so hopefully that gives you an idea of the panelists we have and some of the opening issues they have. We're going to have time at the end to allow questions from the audience, but I have a handful of questions that kind of hopefully the panel could address. Many people say to me, Madnick, all you do is gloom and doom. You're gloom and doom, Madnick. So I thought I'd start my first question, and any one of the panelists or any collection of them can answer. What has been the biggest positive development that you have seen in the past year? Or are there any? Anyone want to make a stab at that one?
Well, it's interesting for us in our industry. I like to refer to it as cooperation. We've had a lot of more participation from our competition and folks who are other manufacturers to really start to look forward and help out our customers. Because that's probably the biggest thing, is folks get siloed and make an investment and then realize quickly they have buyer's remorse because they're only seeing things through their own eyes. And we've seen a lot of folks step forward from the industry and really start to take that initiative on. And it's a great thing for our business and ultimately for all of our clients.
Great, yeah.
So I would like to add, so there is a big positive that has happened because of certain negatives. So because of the high-profile cyber attacks that have happened in the last couple of years, the board, the C-suite has suddenly opened up and they understand the risks that any company is facing because of the type of data they have. There is no data that is not valuable to someone. You cannot say, hey, my company is small, my data is of no value, they are not going to go after me. There is no such thing. So because of the bad things that happen to certain companies, the other companies are taking advantage and making sure that they are putting in control putting in the controls from the beginning and making sure that the data is private, is protected, it has the access that it needs, etc.
Excellent.
So I want to go a little bit different. I'll take in a technology perspective on one of the technologies and the technology areas I think that's really helped us in our job, and it was alluded to by earlier, was in order to overcome some of the talent gap perspective. I'm really seeing a lot of companies, new, innovative, smaller and large companies coming in and really applying advanced big data and data analytics in the area of security so we can get more predictive on cyber attacks. So we're not always chasing the elephant and sweeping up after it. We actually can be predictive. We can understand the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the adversaries. And with machine learning, we can actually just be disruptive of the adversaries during the attack. We can stop so much on trying to chase that we're going to prevent everything bad from happening, which is probably impossible, and focus more on other parts of the kill chain, which is really detect, respond, and recover. And I think these technologies that are coming out through these companies provide us with more advanced tools that we had not seen before to bring all this large amount of data that were coming in and through SEMs or through logs or for whatever your alerting and monitoring mechanism is, but actually derive real intelligence. And you can do actions, and you can do at network speed versus the whole goal on this is to try to take the human speed out of the equation and operate at network speed so you can stay, I don't want to say in front of, but at least not too far behind the adversaries.
That's a good example. One of the things you may have heard about just this past week, we've agreed to do an experiment with IBM Watson to see to what extent can we help to accelerate some of this machine learning and knowledge learning. So one of the things, if you think about the press coverage, people point out, it seems to be that there are increasing numbers of attacks. Is it just a matter of more coverage, or is something happening that's making this happen more? In other words, things seem to be getting worse. Is that your perception? And if so, what accounts for that?
I think from a healthcare perspective, it is definitely increasing because maybe 2 or 4 years ago, they did not know how important PHI data is. So as an individual or as a company, I can get secure again, but I cannot get private again. If I lose private information of my clients, the genetics, the x-rays, the fingerprinting, all those things are not going to change. I lose a credit card, I cancel it. So it's very hard to get private again. So now they are understanding how important PHI information is, and they're going after that. Well, while prior to that, it was more on financial, retail industry, etc.
Yeah, the dollars are really going up on the PII. Why? Because you can take over, right?
Yeah.
And so you can do things that you couldn't and people didn't really think about because if I go after what a healthcare provider has, they typically have everything I need to recreate me. And so the card data, there's tons of it floating around out there. The dollar amount has dropped off. And so where are the attacks headed? I think the numbers probably have definitely gone up, but I think the focus is changing. And I think that focus will continue to change as there's a realization that the dime moves forward. Some years back, we tried to come up with a program to really start looking at how could we minimize the value of data. So in other words, if I published all the credit card information, if I published all the PII, and it was out there, then the value of it gets removed. But there's a downrange impact, and how do you deal with that downrange impact? So things such as PII associated your social security number, date of birth, address, all the rest of those things that we use for initial identification and then eventually authorization for things like credit cards. How do you minimize that? And I think that the real challenge is trying to figure that next step out, because if you can do that, you've removed the financial incentives around those. But guess what? They're going to go off and they're going to go after something else. So the challenge is figuring out what that next piece of the equation is and then being able to mitigate it before it actually takes hold.
Excellent. So show of hands, how many people here work in the CIO organization of their company? Maybe about a third of you. So let me tell you, this is a provocative question possibly for many of us. CIO or CISO, whatever you want to call it, where should it report in the organization? Should it report to the CIO organization? Should it report to the CFO, the CEO, the board? What have been your feelings about it? What have been the experiences you've seen elsewhere? Who wants to make a stab at that?
Well, I'll go first. So, and this is my fourth or fifth, depending on how you title it out, job as a CISO in various places. So I've always worked for the CIO. I'm increasingly it's become increasingly more apparent to me that in today's world, a CISO working as a direct report for the CIO is probably not the right model to continue moving forward. And for the following reasons. When I go to the board, I also, in my situation, I also am a direct report to our board. So I report to our board. Our technology committee of our board meets 9 times a year. I'm the only standing agenda item on every one of their agendas. So I report, and by definition, I report directly to the board. So what happens is this natural tension between operations and cyber, and there's only so much money, and there's only so much time and prioritization that can be placed. So when you know, like every CISO, when you report to the board, you report on cyber risk. What do you think are the risk areas? What are the things that we need to invest more in? You know, and so you're doing that, and the board comes back with your general questions. Are you getting enough support and money to do everything you need to do? And you have your CIO boss sitting right next to you. It's hard to give a very honest answer on that. It's also, the questions are, if you know you have these vulnerabilities, like patching or whatever it is, how come you're not moving faster and how come you're not fixing it? And my response is, that's not a question for me to answer, that's a question for the CIO to answer. Because I'm not responsible for patching, that's in the operation element. So we run into a lot of these conflicts that don't really get resolved. And I think, so moving it, I'm not sure the CFO, I think a lot of companies are going to like a chief risk officer that reports directly to either the COO or the CEO. I guess we're using every acronym in the business world. But I think there needs to be some independence of the CISO from the IT organization.
Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I would totally agree. We've seen a lot of movement. One job ago, initially reported into the CIO. As we started moving things forward, I ended up reporting into the chief legal officer. So that was the risk management organization at that point in time. And so what it did is it allowed that separation. One of the things I drove very hard on that I did not want happen is I wanted the money to drive security programs. I didn't want it hidden off in somebody else's organization. So I was able to maintain it. Because what you're going to do is when you move outside the CIO organization, and this happens even when you're in the CIO, you guys know this, if something, push comes to shove, well, we don't have money to do it. Well, if I've got the money, you've removed one of those things. The next thing that will come up is I don't have enough people to do it. If I've got the money and I've got the contracting resources and all the rest of that stuff to make that happen, then that whole dynamic changes. So I'm seeing that now in chief legal or chief risk officer. In several companies recently, the chief risk officer now reports to the audit committee of the board of directors, not directly into the CEO or anybody else. So we're starting to see that movement, and I think what that does is it gives the independence. And again, the CISO should really be one of those independent bodies that's doing the governance, risk, and compliance function, in addition to doing the validation of the implementation of the security program as well.
So unless somebody has any comment they will mention, I'm going to have a two-parter, if you will. One thing I think I've seen change over the past year, I want to get your response to, is the amount of support from top management and the boards seem to be increasing. I want to get if you agree with that. But I'm also hearing that the biggest roadblock nowadays is not so much senior management, but middle management. I'm curious whether I respond to either of those 2 points, if you agree or disagree with either one of them.
So before I go to that, I just want to go back to the CISO, where it should fall. So I kind of agree with you, but I don't, because it depends on the organization.
True.
So this is my second job as a CISO, where I'm reporting to the CIO. And the 2 organizations that I've worked with, this sort of model seems to be working out. But again, if it was a different kind of industry or if it was a different organization, maybe I should be reporting to a chief legal officer or something. And also there are 2 different roles of a security officer. One is just the information security officer, and then is the chief security officer, where they have not just the information security, but they have physical security and the other risks that are that are considered in an enterprise. So if that is the role, then of course it should not be anywhere under the CIO. But again, it depends on what organization you are in, how that organization is defined. And then I think sometimes it will fit here, sometimes it fits there.
I don't know if it applies to any of the panelists here today, but let me raise a slightly different twist on the same issue here. We're seeing more, back to the theme we talked about of connected devices. So let's assume, for example, you are Ford or General Motors or whatever. Who's responsible for the cybersecurity of the cars you're producing? Is that an IT CIO function? Is that a manufacturing, engineering, design function? Now, admittedly, this is not your industries, but I don't know if you want to comment upon that complication.
We see it, you know, being
some of that,
an engineering-centric company.
It's the chip manufacturer's fault.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's it.
Being an engineering-centric company, it has to start from the design phase. I mean, we think about it as you look at today's products and some of the hacks and some of the things that have gone on, a lot of it has to do with poor design and poor implementation. You know, we started with the coding. We used to outsource coding overseas, but no one cared how it was coded, just that it got done in time. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of that today. And it's the same thing when we start moving IP addresses to industrial controls. We're starting to see some of the same things. Everyone goes for the lowest cost of manufacturing, so I'm just going to outsource that portion. And then, you know, as risk officers, they inherit all of this. I mean, whoever would have thought? I was just recently visiting a university, and the university got hacked. Their power system on the university campus got hacked because everyone was looking at the students themselves, but no one was looking at the infrastructure. And it had to be that someone put a new cluster controller out there for some flow controls, and then they realized they can wreak havoc upon that. And, you know, for the universities today, they become the test beds for a lot of cyber attacks. Because there's so much fragmentation, and by the way, the population of types of devices that are in the university campus is mind-boggling. Forget what's going on in the rest of the world itself. So the controls are low, and then you had mentioned a little bit about, you know, the talent in middle management. Yeah. Middle management, you know, you have some great CISOs, but the middle management who's responsible for either implementation or the operation of that winds up being just basically a deluge and saying, here, you're the plumber, go fix the problem. But we've never elevated their talents to be able to help them deal with the problems themselves.
Anybody else want to comment on those aspects?
So I'm going to wrap a couple of questions into one here and answer. So first off, why does it look like it's gotten worse than it has? Back to an earlier question, because the simple answer is because it has. And I think what the boards and the senior executives are starting to come along. I don't think it's pervasive throughout all of the organizations, certainly down the middle management, is they really don't understand the threat. And I think you read about it in the paper, and you hear about the highly publicized attacks, that Stuart mentioned earlier. But I don't think they really understand that the level of sophistication and the amount of individuals that are involved in cyber attack and their skill sets have increased substantially in the last 5 to 7 years. And their motivations are different because now with the onset of digitization for getting personal information that was never readily available before, and the ability to commoditize that information financially, and the rise of nation states in this area. And you're seeing a lot of these more sophisticated attacks are related back to nation states, whether they're their own individuals or they're outsourcing it to criminal elements, hacktivist organizations, ideological groups, whatever. But you're seeing a lot different motivations than it used to be, a hacker at a university trying to make his name or trying to prove a point for his thesis, which it was a lot in times past. And so I think that's the biggest change that people have to understand is we're not dealing with war games and the guy in the basement anymore.
Yeah, that gets into, the whole dynamic. So when we first started doing a lot of this stuff, and you'd see, you put up your first IDS sensor and you'd get all scary. And then you started noticing that it was repeat attacks and they were coming from different angles, and it was kids playing around. And then gradually, as they started maturing, then we started moving into organized crime, and then the nation state crowd started kicking in. So, the nation state folks start off with the easy stuff. So you've got the C team, and they take a look at, and they start, rattling your door, and you'll usually hear them wandering around, and you can block them pretty readily if you're paying attention and you've got the right tools. Then you move to the B team because they discovered that you noticed the C team was wandering around. They're a lot quieter, and they start doing the rattling and the probing, and and a lot more sophisticated attacks, leveraging their technology, their infrastructure, and their goals. And then finally, if you figure those guys out, you move to the A team. You don't see those people. So that's really sort of the challenge that you're faced with is really taking a look at it. And back to the part of this question, which was who does the product security versus the information security, and they're typically two teams. So having worked in a couple of different industries doing this, one where we were doing really online kinds of things, the information security team that was protecting the internals also had a consulting team that worked with the line of business to drive security. So again, what were good security credentials? So there are certain things such as multi-factor authentication. We came up with a couple of ways of doing that kind of nifty. And so driving that. And then on the manufacturing side, and so in the case of the company that I currently work for, they're trying to figure out how do we break into a market and change the paradigm. So we started really looking at what it would take. We hired several really well-educated, very solid individuals to come in and then really start from the basis. So we started building and leveraging things that several years ago, quite a few years ago, we had been harping on, in the security arena, hardware-based security. So start with hardware and then start building up on that stack, and monitor what's going on the operating system, on the bootloader, on the applications and the services that were going in there. So that was worked in conjunction with the people that were actually having to deploy the technology. So again, we had the product team who had a mandate to go off, and this is the market we want to be in. So we built our product around it, make it simple and easy to use, make it not onerous, so you have that opportunity to really leverage those tools without having an impact on the operations. And then on the other side, all of a sudden the CISO over here on this piece is now a consumer. And they're going to come back at you pretty hard if it doesn't work. So again, as you start looking at that and you start building those models, you've got this a yin and yang, and it actually works out pretty well in most cases. Again, it's industry dependent and what's your end result, so you need to think about that.
So last thing, cars don't scare me, medical devices scare me. All right, and where we are with medical devices. So you want to talk about a product. That's the one that, from a cyber, that's the one that really scares me.
We have a student working on a project exactly looking at those types of issues. Yeah. It's very scary, possibly. In fact, some things have already been done in the past, demonstrated in the past. So let me ask a kind of another question, twist on this. I'm hearing this more and more. I'm curious what your reaction to it. In the past, we've talked about, you said the student hacker in the basement or whatever. But I'm hearing more and more concern about the role of this they call supply chain. The customers, not necessarily bad customers, but flaws, let's say, in the customer's procedures that permeate all your vendors, or whether it be on the relationship side or the equipment side. So you're making your equipment and you're sourcing the components, the chips by other companies. Are you seeing that as an increasing problem area, or how was your reaction to that?
Well, we do it as a manufacturer in the supply chain. We push it all the way out. And you go through secured code reviews nowadays while products come to market. It's kind of ironic because you think 10 years ago, believe it or not, some of the biggest security flaws were in the security products. So
I was told that the Turkish pipeline was broken into through the security cameras, which had default passwords on them.
Yeah. Admin. But that's one of the things that we look for as a manufacturer, but there's a lot in terms of where folks go, and we see it with security professionals a lot, putting that onus into the agreements that they have with suppliers and having an audit of that. Because it's not just what you put on paper. I think Mark mentioned it quite eloquently. It's not just what you put on paper. You got to test these guys to make sure they're putting into practice what they're putting on paper.
There was a couple of where cyber vulnerabilities were interjected in devices. They were done during the distribution capability. So they actually had stolen devices when they were in shipping. Yep. An external shipper. They were captured there. The vulnerabilities were introduced into the hardware at that point, and then they were, re-taped up and sent on their way. So I think the supply chain is not just at, who's building the silicon for the chips and who's actually writing the software. You've got to look at it from end to end, and what's your provenance and what's your risk profile from end to end. There's a lot of different ways to attack the supply chain.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It's interesting because if you don't look at the end-to-end components of it and you don't understand what those pieces are, then you tend to get really tied up in other challenges. I think within Samsung, we make most of the stuff that we have, or that we produce. So we make our chipsets, we make our screens, we make our batteries, all the rest of that stuff. But it doesn't mean that we don't have to look at those independent pieces of the puzzle, even internally, and understand what's happening. And making sure that the standards are followed, making sure that what's delivered is what was required, and then reviewing what's actually going into the product. When you get a smartphone or something like that, we validate the OS, we validate the kernel, we validate the firmware and all the rest of it. And we have to validate the drivers and make sure that the drivers meet the specific requirements as well, because in many cases, some of those drivers will come from third parties. So again, it's really looking at the complete supply chain and then understanding where those problems are. And going back to it, you have to start with it and do the on-site for those critical ones, and then investigate and certainly look at what's going on when you receive something, so that you know what's coming in was what was intended and what left the factory. And then when you ship to a customer, making sure that the packaging, for example, things like overpack, can you have ways of detecting malicious intent or somebody tamper evidence on a platform? So again, it's really looking at that complete supply chain. And I've talked a lot about the hardware side, but you have the same issue if you've got a service provider. Do you know what they're doing? Have you investigated what their program looks like? And have they had a third party that you trust do the on-site assessment? Because if all they're doing, and I think this gets back to Mark, having been on the financial services side, you've got tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, they all fill out a cute little form. Who does the validation? Who's got the money and the resources to go off and do the physical assessment, so you do these random kinds of audits? So, again, it's taking a look at that complete picture and then understanding where your highest risks are. Focus in on those, but don't forget the others, because those will bite you as well.
Roota mentioned at the beginning about the fact that it varies by industry and by companies and so on. So let me ask a question. The government is increasingly playing a role in various ways, in some cases directly affecting legislation and regulations, and somewhat maybe indirectly by setting standards. One of the, I don't know how many people are familiar with, but there's the NIST cybersecurity framework. I'm interested to get your reaction to it, because many people talk about the positives, but I've got another faculty member here who will say it is the work of the devil. And they're not talking about political campaigns either. But so obviously different people see the role of the government in different ways, both in terms of what they have done or can do. Any comments, any of you want to play on that?
So from a regulation perspective, my theory is compliance does not equal security. Mm-hmm. So compliance plus X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D is equal to security. Compliance is good, but just because you're compliant to regulation does not guarantee that you are secure. So there are a lot of things that you need to do after you say, okay, you're compliant, because in regulations, they usually say, okay, you do this, put these reasonable security controls. Yeah. What are the reasonable security controls, right? So that is defined by you as an industry or as an organization. What is reasonable for you? What is reasonable for a certain kind of data? What is reasonable for another kind of data? So there are, I look at compliance at things that we need to do, but to actually make sure that my data remains confidential, its integrity stays, all of that requires much more than me being compliant to 1 or 2 or 5.
I'd like to ask you a comment, but one of the concerns someone mentioned to me is that sometimes the top executives basically view that as their criteria. Are we compliant? If we're compliant, that's all we need to do. And obviously it varies by company, but anybody else want to comment upon this issue in general?
Well, I think a lot of companies that have more senior risk in cybersecurity organizations are probably moving away from that compliance checklist. All you have to do is point out, an example that we all do is that I don't know what the time frame is, but relatively a short time before they actually announced the hack or at Target, they went through a whole PCI compliance. So, and they passed it with flying colors. So I think those arguments are starting to dissipate. I think the real challenge on the NIST and the other frameworks are they're frameworks. They're not a cookbook and they're not a magic bullet. So they're a tool that you use to help identify and move forward. In a highly regulated environment, as healthcare and financials are, we get overregulated. There's a lot of regulations. NIST is probably no better or no worse than ISO 27000 or COBIT or ITIL or SANS, or it's pick your poison. The one advantage I think that NIST has is it allows you to talk the same tech. If it's adopted, and it seems to be fairly widely adopted, certainly within the United States, in some places around the world, it allows you to talk the same taxonomy across a number of sectors. So it isn't us just talking a financial cyber framework with other financials. It allows us to talk to suppliers and retailers and clients. So it gives us more of a common framework. If you use that as the Bible and the answer, you're going to be, I agree, you're going to be sorely disappointed.
You really have to understand your business and what the risks are associated with your business. The frameworks will help you quantify and put boundaries around some of those, and in some cases you're going to have to go well beyond what's in those. Those are baselines. So you really need to understand what you're doing, what your business is doing, and the relative risks, and then be able to address those. If you can't do that, and all you're doing is just following the compliance check off on whatever you're doing, you're really going to have some challenges. The other thing is that it takes a long time for those to develop. And so once they come out, they are old news. Now, are they still relevant? Yes, but they're a baseline that has age on them. You need to be looking at what you should be doing with the latest round of technology, with the latest round of business requirements, and with the latest round of customer needs. If you're not doing that, then you'll miss the ball and you'll end up having severe problems not too far down the road when somebody discovers a challenge or an issue associated with the implementation that you did.
I have a question. I think someone mentioned earlier. How many of you, show of hands, how many of you in your organization have moved some things to the cloud? Maybe 70, 80%. So question, the movement to the cloud, once again, I've heard both arguments. One argument is, well, you've got people who manage the cloud who are experts. They really have talent and maybe better in some sense than you are. So maybe it's more secure in the cloud. And conversely, the arguments go to yours. What's your view about moving to the cloud? Does it aid, hurt, or some mixed bag in terms of cybersecurity?
Well, what we see it many times is just moving the problems elsewhere and indemnifying yourselves. And a lot of folks, if you start to read the fine print in many cloud providers, is they'll take none of the risk or accept none of the risk. So really at the end of the day it's an enablement tool, but it's still got some maturation to it. Everyone's doing it for cost efficiencies, operational efficiencies. But we all know, forsaking the cost and operational efficiencies and the growth and evolution of technology, what's happened in the past? We've gotten burnt. And moving the problem elsewhere without having the right controls in place, that's a risky proposition. And a lot of folks and a lot of organizations, it's good. What is hurting most is the small to mid-sized organizations, the small to mid-sized businesses, because they don't have the IT staff. Yeah. So they see that as a true cost efficiency to them and enables them to scale. But those folks also have the most to risk because certain large organizations can accept a loss. A small to mid-sized business cannot accept a loss to that level.
But even if I move my data to the cloud, that doesn't take away the ownership of data. So I still own the data. I still need to do my due diligence. I still need to have a robust identity and access management system that makes sure that the access is controlled, the people who need access to certain kind of data have it, the other data is masked, et cetera, et cetera. So while yes, it provides efficiency and all of that, it does not change my responsibility of data protection.
I'm curious your reactions in either your company or other companies, but I've heard people kind of viewing it as cybersecurity problems have been solved because all the data is now being managed by XYZ. I don't know if you've heard that, but I've heard comments like that. I don't agree with it.
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all.
Wishful thinking, possibly.
Yeah.
So I think as you see, it's an evolutionary and it's a migratory situation. As more information gets moved to the cloud and more large, small, mid-sized, small companies embrace the cloud and adopt the cloud standards, there is probably some increase in security in using cloud because security in some aspects has been thought as the cloud developers and the cloud applications and the infrastructure and the providers have working through that had not necessarily been the case with some of the legacy architectures. However, the adversaries are also going to move to the cloud. And if you think there's anything inherently more secure about the software and the underlying infrastructure of the cloud, I think it's wait to be seen. I think as the adversaries move toward it, you'll see more vulnerabilities announced, you'll see more the problem, the real downside is if an adversary does manage to breach a cloud provider, their return is much greater than it is on a
It's not just one company. It's
yeah,
hundreds
right.
of thousands of
So
companies.
you've really hit you've really
Pay dirt.
Pay dirt. Yeah.
Well, it's back to the bank comment. I mean, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Well, so, why do you go after a cloud provider? Because that's where everybody's data is and the information there to really do it. I think small and medium-sized companies typically don't have the IT staff and don't really have the budget to support a lot of it. And I think there is some potential opportunities, and people need to be aware of what they're walking into and what they really need, because there may be, and again, back to what Mark said, there may be an uptick in the security of that environment relative to where they are today. But they still need to be planning for the future. They still need to understand what the security requirements are and what's actually being done for them, and then what assessments are going on against that infrastructure that they're walking into. So, interesting place to be at this point.
So I have one last question, then I'll open it up to the audience. I have some more as well, the audience. But if we were to reconvene this panel in 3 or 5 years, do you expect the situation to be much better or much worse, and why?
Well, I hope to be retired by then.
So better, by definition.
That's a good business plan.
I think the situation will be. I actually think it will be better. Doing this since 1981, I actually think it's going to be better. And I think for a lot of what you've brought up and what the panel has discussed about the knowledge of and the acceptance, and I think we're more attuned to cyber and the implications and the risks associated with it. Now, whether we're doing anything about it at varying levels, that also varies. But I think all these discussions that we're having, 3 to 5 years ago, this panel probably wouldn't be convened at this conference. So I think there's this evolutionary process, and I do think it'll get better, even with the adversarial growth and everything else. But I think we're growing at a faster rate than the adversaries are. I think they're reaching their peak, and I think we're catching up very, very closely.
Roota, you want to give your view?
So I can't say whether it's going to be better or worse, but it's going to be very different. And the reason is because we are moving into, I like to call it Internet of Everything instead of Internet of Things, because it's going to be everything that's connected to the Internet. So the threat surface, the attack surface is going to be like 10 times, 100 times. So plus the type of information that will be available 5 years from now will be very different than what it is today. So that information will be valuable at that time. So there will be so many new things that will come up that the bad guys will go after. So I think it's going to be very different, but not necessarily better.
Well, I think some things will, we're getting much better, and we have to extend this to other platforms. But I think as we start developing in on the current mobile thing, we were able to start sort of from scratch. So we moved from the PC now into mobile, and so we're rebuilding and re-architecting that. So we'll start to remove some of the security risks associated with that space. So, we start driving hardware-based security, which, makes it much harder to whack. We start really monitoring what's going on the device, and we've got integrity capabilities. So we now start to move that dime elsewhere. So as we start moving into IoT, so we're headed back into that cycle. So, PCs, when they got started, really weren't a problem. Although going back to 81 and 82, I'm going, yeah, they actually were. Remember bulletin boards? Yeah, I need to pull stuff down off the bulletin boards. Funny, I asked my 23-year-old son if he knew what a bulletin board was, and he pointed at the thing on the wall behind me, and I'm going, no, that's not what I'm talking about. But I think, so the thing is so we're morphing, and we're now back into a new cycle with IoT. And unless we establish and we really understand how that implementation works, we're going to keep repeating this. And security is all over the place. So some parts of IoT have security built in. And I think a lot of us are trying to drive that model forward, is have that security built in from the start. But a lot of the standards and the other things that are necessary to drive the interoperability, which is key to the success of the Internet of Things, still have to be worked out. So the caution is, yeah, it's great opportunities, great things going on, but you really have to understand what's going on in that space, what you want to do, and what the threat model looks like associated with that implementation, and what risks you're willing to take. Because it's clearly there. Will it be great once we're done? Yeah, probably. When are we going to be done? Long time out. So again, be very cautious and really look at and architect things well before you deploy them. Don't let them just happen to you.
You look at the people, process, and technology, and I still think the biggest challenge for us is the people.
Yeah.
Academia has to continue to generate folks that have the skill sets necessary to be those next generation coders, those next generation cyber warriors that are out there that are helping. Because right now, available slots, we look at it in terms of going out and recruiting folks, there's a 40% deficit. In the next 2 years, they expect that to grow to 60% deficit in available talent to fill these roles. And what do we do? Where do we go? Who do we turn to? And the university spaces are going to play a major role in that.
So I'll give you my approach to answering this. There have been various studies. Once again, studies are always subject to challenges, if you will. But everything indicates, the good news is that the good guys are getting better. The bad news is the bad guys are getting badder faster. And a good example, my colleague here, Michael Siegel, has been looking a lot at hackers and so on. And we recently studied the review of the Ukrainian power grid attack. And what was fascinating about the conclusion paragraph was that they rated this attack as low on sophistication, but high on coordination. Because they had to do 7 different attack vectors, if you will, to break in. Everyone was readily available, $14.95 on Amazon, essentially. So the point being, you no longer needed to be a PhD or spend years and years researching. There's so much sharing going on in the dark web of all of the tricks, if you will, that they're learning fast. In fact, in some cases, they're learning faster than we're learning, which is one of the challenges. Once again, how it's going to play out, who knows? But clearly, these are exciting and challenging times. So I want to make sure I open it up for some questions from the audience, please. Right here in front of David. You can go first.
Yeah, do I need a mic? Well, why don't I kick it off and you can read that when I get a mic. I've got a little dilemma. I need some help and some ideas from you guys. David Boyle from National Australia Bank in Melbourne. One of the outcomes that we're seeing with the publicity that this whole topic is getting is that no longer is this a backroom thing. Our customers care about it. Yeah. So our marketing guys want to be able to market how good we are at this. But when you do that, you put a big target on your head. So have you got any bright ideas on how we can build our brand and our reputation as being secure, which in banking is kind of important, without putting a target on my head?
I think one of the people mentioned here that often the security operation reports to the law office. One company reports to the PR office of the firm. Any can
I like that. The PR. Oh, that's good. So one of the things that I'm trying, being in the healthcare environment, being in the insurance industry, is to try run security as a business. So I work with my marketing communications department to let our clients and customers know what we are doing with their data. So in this day and age, people are going to share data. They cannot function without sharing data, but they still have a choice of which company they want to share data with. So what I'm trying to do is position ourselves, our security program, as a competitive advantage as compared to any other competitor that we have. So that's one of the things I'm trying to focus, is to run a security program as a business and work hand in hand to show how important our client data is to us and how we make sure it's private and it's secure.
So I saw a bunch of other hands.
Just real quickly on this other one, is think about a different model. So don't go out and say we're the most secure, and paint that target on your head. Think about taking a different tack, which is, hey, as a customer of Bank XYZ, if you experience fraud activity or what have you, we will cover you. Well, the background on that is that you've got enough confidence in the security implementation that you've put into play, in the processes that you've built out, that you're willing to indemnify them against loss. So you're not painting that big target like we're really, really safe. What you're doing is you're indemnifying them, which is telling them that you think you're really, really safe, but you're not painting that big target on you. So it's something to think about. I mean, there's a couple of other places that are doing that.
Yeah, and to add to that, it's the same thing. So it's nobody can say that I'm 100% going to protect your data. It will never get breached. So we need to say that, okay, if we get breached, these are the things that we will offer you. These are the things we will help you out with. So
one last thing on the bank, just from a bank perspective. I firmly believe in the financial community, the way that, because of the interdependencies that we have across the financial, there really is no competitive advantage that you can sell security. I don't think that I can sell my security to a client says we're more secure than BNY Mellon or Northern Trust or Citi, and I don't think they can do the same vice versa. Because of I can get hacked from BNY Mellon, they can get hacked and then they can impact us. And so I really think I think if we do it more and again, this is limited more to the financial, I think we have to sell security and the security trust as a sector, not as and I frankly don't, unless there's a major malfeasance or a breach, I don't think what I've seen, and I'm by far not a financial expert, I don't think that a client's gonna say, well, I'm gonna go choose this bank versus that bank because I think their security is, if they're gonna give me a higher rate, I think, or less fees. I think it's a part of our doing business, and I've been very vocal in the bank that we should not commoditize and sell security as a product within our That's something we provide our clients as doing business with us, and we're not gonna sell it necessarily. Because then we'll get taken down. I guarantee it. If you raise up, you're gonna get your head shot.
Yeah, it's baseline expectation. Everybody assumes that your bank is secure. Even though we see, the hacks and stuff like that, they still assume that it's secure. So if you're advertising something else, then they're going to have some challenges.
But you need to do all the things that Roota said, instill confidence.
Exactly.
We do a lot of we do marketing on our websites, and like with Swift, we've sent out notices to all our clients. This is kind of what we're doing, very high level stuff, but to show that we know about it, and B, that we're doing something to
The good news is, based on your answers, you don't need to report to the chief risk officer, so that's
Yes.
So going back to the supply chain discussion and the security issues and how you can attack that, how do you most effectively educate people at the endpoints who might see something that's a little bit wrong, but normally wouldn't think anything of it? And I mean people low man on the totem pole that see a lot of different things every day coming through the factory or the warehouse or whatever, and also consumers. You receive something from Amazon or wherever, the box is a little screwy. Are you really going to call the company about it? And if you are, what do you realistically expect to have happen? So how do you achieve that education?
Well, interestingly enough, in our business, we go through routine training, and even at the most basic level, everyone goes through security training on an annual basis, talking about just those topics. And we make it more conversational. It's not these animation little role-playing things. It's talking about real-life things, about our practices that we use in our daily lives and the roles that we have and what we provide our suppliers. I mean, there are so many mechanisms now in today's world of social media for us to disclose information, projects that we're working on, anything, even at the basic level. I mean, somebody who's cleaning up and sweeping up one of our buildings has access potentially to confidential information, and that information doesn't get disposed of. And so we really look at it as an education on an annual basis, and every employee has to, as a terms of their employment.
One of the things I've heard that's been very effective in some organizations is actually helping people to understand how to be better secure in their private lives, for their home and so on, because that makes it very personal to them. And then the practices they develop to protect themselves at home, they then carry that back to the business rather than the other way around. I'm not saying it works in every case, but we've heard very good success stories from that kind of practice. Yes, behind you, yes. Yes. You have the microphone? No, behind you. Oh, the fellow behind you, I thought was going to.
Oh, no. I was just going to comment on this aspect that this is Michael Siegel from Sloan. Stuart
Michael Siegel, my colleague on the ICQ.
Stuart and I work together to comment that we're doing a lot of work on taking a look at the security culture in general in organizations, industrial control system environments, and so on and so forth. But as a society, too, to take a look at the way we think about security and the way we find an importance in that, and to translate that on the corporation level, but also on the societal level, to issues around the way people think about cybersecurity. So if we thought about cybersecurity the way we think about security, that door is unlocked, it shouldn't be unlocked. We should tell somebody, you know, that's a natural thing to do. We should have the same effect when looking at something that has to do with security along the cyber lines. And so that's an aspect of getting to an answer to your question. I just want to follow up with that.
I think I have time for one more question. I think the fellow right behind you has very patiently been waving.
Thank you. They used to say that the most of the cyber attacks come from insiders. Do you think this will change with this old risk that we have acknowledged from cybersecurity? Are the new attacks will come from outsiders?
But just to clarify the point, when I say insiders, I often mean unintentionally. So the person who takes his laptop home and his kids use it to play down some games, and he takes it back to the office. So a lot of the, quote, the insiders are people who are authorized who by accident basically open the door. I'm not sure if you have a different meaning for it, but the question is that likely to change, I guess his question is.
I don't think so. If you look at all the reports and the studies that are done, and using your qualifier studies, but still, I think it's still, the vast majority are externally originated that have any consequence. However, the small, I think it's something like 92% are externally originated and say 7 or 8% are internally. But of course, those 7 or 8% are much more impactful and much more, can be much more destructive. So the impact, the likelihood may not be as great, but the impact is significantly greater. I still think externally is still going to be the major attack vector for most of us in the foreseeable future. Whether it's a malicious insider or it's an unintentional insider, I think they're a lot smaller, and I think they're somewhat harder to identify, but in some ways they're easier to control. So I think we're still focusing a lot on the external threat for the most part.
I noticed that the red light is blinking, so I think we're about to explode. Maybe one quick question. Yes, please.
We've got two different viruses nowadays, it's ransomware as well as the Zeus virus. Curiosity question, how are you guys handling internally? And then ransomware, would you pay or would you try to fight it?
You're referring to like things like ransomware?
Correct.
Yeah, we had a conversation about that over lunch. Anybody make a stab at that issue?
Yeah, so I
was very familiar with ransomware, the idea being someone attacks your computers and in some sense holds them hostage. Either they freeze them out or they cryptographically encode them. So the question is, do you want to pay to kind of release your computers?
So I wouldn't pay for ransomware. We do backups of our data. So in case we did get ransomware, we can always get our data back from the backup. The other reason why I wouldn't pay is by paying you kind of are surrendering, saying that, hey, we lost the battle. And also there have been cases where you pay and you still don't get the correct code to decrypt the data. So it could be any of those situations. So I handle it in two ways, which is, I guess, those are the only two ways I know how to handle ransomware is user education and backup. Those are the only two ways you can handle it at this point of time. If you guys know of any other, please let me know.
Okay, I don't realize that the conference is really jam-packed with lots of activities. You want to kind of wrap us up? Anything you want to say for the next session and so on?
So I just wanted to thank you, Professor, and the panel. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to them after the conference is over. Thank you.